Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been driving for 4 hours when my phone finally picked up a signal. I was in the mountains, headed to see my mother who'd been in the hospital for weeks. The doctors had warned us it could happen anytime, but I thought I'd make it. I thought I'd get to say goodbye. The voicemail was from my sister. Her voice was shaken when she told me Mom was gone. She passed away about 15 minutes before the call. I must have listened to that message 3 times before it really sank in. I was still 4 hours away from home, alone on a highway that stretched endlessly ahead of me. My hands were trembling so hard I had to pull over. There was a gas station at the next exit, one of those places that's just a few pumps and a small convenience store attached. I parked near the back of the lot and sat there for a while, staring at my phone. I needed to call my sister back. I needed to hear her voice to make this real somehow, but I couldn't seem to make my fingers work. The last conversation I'd had with my mother kept replaying in my head. It had been 2 days earlier, right before I left. She'd been so weak she could barely speak above a whisper. She told me to drive safe and that she'd see me soon. I promised her I'd be there by the next evening. I'd left a day late because of work, thinking I had time. Now I'd never get to keep that promise. Eventually, I grabbed a handful of paper napkins from my glove box and wiped my face. They came away wet and I stuffed them in my jacket pocket. My eyes were burning and my throat felt tight. I hadn't really cried yet, not properly. It was like everything was happening underwater, slow and muffled. I went inside to clean myself up and maybe get some coffee for the rest of the drive. The fluorescent lights were too bright and made everything feel even more surreal. I headed toward the bathroom first, keeping my head down. I could feel that my face was blotchy and swollen, but I didn't care what anyone thought. When I came out of the bathroom, I felt slightly more human. I grabbed a box of tissues from one of the aisles and a large coffee from the self-serve machine. My hands were still shaking when I tried to get the lid on properly. I was managing barely to hold it together. That's when she appeared. This woman just stepped directly into my path, blocking the aisle completely. She had her arms crossed and was looking at me with disgust. I stopped short, confused, still holding my coffee and tissues. She told me that whatever I was bawling about wasn't worth it. Just said it straight to my face like that. Like she had any right to comment on my life. I stared at her. For a second, I couldn't process what she'd just said. She was looking at me like I was some dramatic teenager having a meltdown over nothing. Like my grief was offensive to her. Then she told me to pull myself together. Said nobody wanted to see that. She added that she'd had a bad day too and you didn't see her making a scene about it. Something inside me just snapped. Not into anger, exactly. More like all the normal social filters that keep you polite just disappeared. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out those wadded up napkins I've been crying into. They were damp and crumpled and disgusting. I took her hand without asking and pressed them into her palm. Then I told her my mother had died 15 minutes ago and asked if she could get out of my way. Her face froze. Her fingers closed automatically around the napkins and she just stood there with her mouth open, staring down at her hand like she didn't quite believe what she was holding. She tried to say something but nothing came out. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past her and went to the counter. The cashier was a young guy, maybe 20, and he looked uncomfortable. He clearly heard the whole thing. He rang me up without saying anything at first. Then he told me the coffee was on the house. Said he was sorry for my loss. I thanked him and somehow managed not to start crying again. I took my receipt and walked out into the parking lot. When I got to my car, I saw the woman standing outside the store entrance. She was still holding the napkins, looking down at them like she didn't know what to do. Our eyes met for a second and she looked away quickly. I got in my car and locked the doors. I sat there for another 10 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. I called my sister and we talked for a while, both of us crying on and off. She told me Mom's last words had been about me, that she'd been waiting for me to get there, that she'd tried to hold on. My sister said Mom had asked about me around 3 p.m., wanting to know how far away I was. She'd fallen asleep after that and never woke up. The guilt hit me like a punch to the chest. If I'd left a day earlier like I'd planned, I would have made it. If I hadn't stopped for lunch, hadn't taken that extra hour at the rest stop, my sister seemed to know what I was thinking. She told me Mom knew I was coming, that she knew I loved her, that I shouldn't blame myself, but I did anyway. The rest of the drive is a blur. I must have stopped for gas at least once more, but I don't remember it. I don't remember what the roads looked like or what songs played on the radio. My brain was just stuck on repeat thinking about my mother and how I'd never hear her voice again. But I do remember that woman's face. I remember the exact moment when her smug expression crumbled into shock. I remember those brown, soggy napkins in her hand and how she just stood there holding them like she didn't know what to do. My mother had a wicked sense of humor. She was the kind of person who'd find the comedy in almost any situation, even dark ones. When I told my sister about what happened at the gas station, a few days later, she laughed so hard she started crying again. She said Mom would have loved that she would have been so proud of me. And she was right. My mother would have absolutely loved it. She spent her whole life refusing to let rude people walk all over her, and she taught me to do the same. She used to tell me that kindness was important, but so was standing up for yourself, that you could be a good person without being a doormat. Maybe that's why I did it. Maybe in that moment, with my filters gone and my heart broken, I channeled her a little bit. I think about that woman sometimes. I wonder if she thinks about it too. I wonder if she ever approaches crying strangers in public anymore, or if she learned something that day. Probably not. People like that rarely do, but I hope those soggy napkins haunt her a little bit. I've had the same group of friends for a few years now. There's 5 of us total, and we don't hang out constantly. But when we do, it's usually relaxed and fun. Nothing fancy, just the kind of get-togethers where you can be yourself without any pressure. Earlier one week, someone brought up the idea of meeting over the weekend. Dinner first, then walking around this street fair that was happening downtown. Everyone agreed it sounded good, so I cleared my Saturday evening to make sure I'd be free. When Saturday came around, I was looking forward to it. Around mid-afternoon, I opened our group chat to sort out the details. We talked about the plan but never actually decided on a time or which restaurant to start at. I sent a message asking what time we were meeting and where exactly we should go. I figured someone would answer pretty quickly since we only had a few hours before the evening started. Nobody responded. I put my phone down and started getting ready, checking back every few minutes. About 15 minutes after I'd sent my message, I saw 2 people in the group sending memes back and forth to each other. Random stuff that had nothing to do with our plans. That told me they were definitely looking at the chat, so I thought they'd get to my question soon enough. Maybe they were still figuring things out themselves. I decided to give it more time. 20 minutes went by with still no answer about the actual plans. I was starting to feel uneasy about the whole thing. I sent another message asking if the plans had changed, or if we were still meeting up tonight. I kept the tone light because I didn't want to seem pushy or annoyed. Still nothing. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to understand what was going on. Had everyone forgotten about tonight? Were they already together somewhere and just didn't think to update me? Did something come up that nobody told me about? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was getting harder not to feel like something was off. I gave it a little longer before making any decisions. After another half hour passed with no word from anyone, I made up my mind. I got in my car and drove toward the area we'd originally talked about meeting. I thought if I was already in the neighborhood, maybe I'd run into them or at least figure out what was happening. It felt better than staying home and worrying about whether I'd been forgotten. I parked downtown and started walking around. The street fair was going strong with lots of people out enjoying themselves. I kept my phone in my hand, refreshing the group chat over and over. Nothing new. I checked social media without really thinking about it, scrolling through stories, and that's when I saw it. 2 people from our group had posted from a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but one that was close to where I was walking right then. They were already there eating. My stomach sank. They were together. And nobody had told me. I stood on the sidewalk trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to just walk over there and join them like nothing was wrong. But another part of me felt embarrassed and hurt. I'd asked twice for basic information and been completely ignored. If they wanted me there, Wouldn't someone have answered my messages? Wouldn't someone have thought to let me know where everyone was? I didn't want to cause any drama or make things awkward. I didn't want to walk in and have everyone look at me like I was the one who messed up by not figuring it out on my own. So I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove home. I didn't send a message to the group telling them I was leaving. I didn't post anything online that could be taken as passive-aggressive. I just left quietly. That night I felt awful. Not angry exactly, just really hurt. I kept going over it in my head, wondering if I had somehow misunderstood the situation. Maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. But the facts were clear. I'd asked direct questions and been ignored while people in that same chat were actively talking to each other about other things. The next morning my phone buzzed with a new message from one of them. They wrote that I ghosted the plan and that it was rude to disappear without saying anything. I read it twice to make sure I was understanding what they were saying. They were actually upset with me. I wrote back explaining everything that had happened. I told them I'd asked multiple times where and when we were meeting and got no response. I explained that I eventually saw people were already together without me and didn't feel right about just showing up uninvited at that point. They responded saying I should have been more direct and that leaving without telling anyone made it look like I didn't care about the plans. They added that I should have just walked up to them at the restaurant anyway. I replied saying it didn't feel right to chase down people who weren't even responding to my messages in the first place. I explained that it felt like I was being left out on purpose, and I wasn't about to beg for attention or force myself into a situation where I clearly wasn't wanted. Things went quiet after that exchange. Over the next couple of days, I heard from a few others in the group. Some of them seemed to think I'd overreacted and that I should have just shown up and everything would have worked itself out. Others said they understood why I felt uncomfortable about the whole thing and that the lack of communication wasn't fair to me. Now there's this weird tension hanging over the entire group. Nobody's fighting openly, but something has definitely shifted. I never meant to punish anyone or make some big dramatic statement. I just didn't want to force myself into a situation where I was clearly being excluded. I still remember the day I got the call that changed everything. My mom had been on the transplant list for 8 months and her condition was getting worse by the week. The doctors told us her heart was failing faster than they'd anticipated and we needed to be ready at a moment's notice. We've been living in this strange limbo ever since her diagnosis 2 years ago. What started as occasional chest pains turned into a full cardiac crisis that left her barely able to walk from the living room to the kitchen. I'd moved back home to take care of her, watching this woman who used to run marathons struggle to climb a single flight of stairs. My own life had been put on hold completely. I'd taken a leave of absence from work, canceled plans I'd been making for years, and spent most of my days managing her medications and driving her to appointments. The hospital became our second home. Weekly checkups, constant monitoring, adjustments to her medication that never seemed to quite work. Every time my phone rang, my heart would stop, wondering if this was it, if this was the call saying they found a match, or the call saying we'd run out of time. Her doctor had been honest with us during our last visit. He said that without a transplant soon, she had maybe 3 to 6 months left. The waiting list was long and compatible hearts were rare. We were running out of time and everyone knew it. Then it finally came, 3 in the morning. A heart was available and Mom was next on the list. We needed to get to the hospital right away. I drove like a maniac through empty streets, Mom sitting quietly in the passenger seat with her emergency bag on her lap. She didn't say much, just squeezed my hand every few minutes. I could see the hope in her eyes mixed with terror. This was it. This was her chance to actually live again. We got to the hospital and were rushed through intake. The transplant coordinator met us in the hallway, explaining the timeline and what would happen next. They were prepping the operating room right now. The donor heart was being transported from another facility and would arrive within the hour. Everything was moving so fast. That's when she appeared. A woman in her mid-50s came storming down the hallway, her face red and twisted with fury. She was being followed by what looked like other family members trying to calm her down. She made a beeline straight for us. She demanded that we give up the heart right now. I stepped in front of my mom and asked her what she was talking about. She told me the heart should go to her brother, who had been waiting for 9 months. She said they'd been told he was next on the list and now suddenly we were getting it instead. The transplant coordinator tried to intervene and explain that the allocation system was based on medical urgency and compatibility. She told the woman that my mother was the best match and had the highest priority because her condition was more critical. The woman said she didn't care about the system. She shouted that her brother had a family and 3 kids who needed their father. She said he had a daughter graduating high school next month and he deserved to be there. My mom spoke up quietly from behind me and said she was sorry about her brother. She told the woman that she'd been waiting too and the doctor said she didn't have much time left. The woman yelled that my mother looked old enough and had already lived her life. She said her brother was only 47 years old and had so much more life to live. I felt anger rising in my chest and told her that my mother was 53 and her life mattered just as much as her brother's life. The woman screamed back that it didn't matter and called us both selfish. She accused us of killing him. One of her family members, an older man, tried to pull her away and told her this wasn't helping. She shoved him off and kept going. She was screaming now and nurses were starting to gather. Security was being called, but the woman wasn't done. She lunged forward trying to get past me to my mother. She yelled that she would make us give it up and that we didn't deserve it. She shoved me hard, and I stumbled backward into Mom, who nearly fell. I caught her just in time, but the impact made her gasp for air. Her face went pale and I could see her clutching her chest. The heart monitor she was wearing started beeping frantically. I asked Mom if she was okay. That's when the woman lost it completely. She grabbed Mom's arm and started pulling. She ordered my mother to march into the office and tell them to give the heart to her brother. The transplant coordinator and 2 nurses were trying to pull her off, but she had a death grip on my mother's wrist. Mom was wheezing now, struggling to breathe, and panic shot through me. I yelled at her to get off and told her she was hurting my mother. Security finally arrived and it took 3 of them to pry the woman away. She was still screaming, thrashing against them like a wild animal. She kept shouting that this wasn't fair or right and called us murderers. She said we were stealing her brother's life and that we'd pay for this. They dragged her down the hallway while she continued to scream. Her family members were trying to apologize to us, looking horrified and embarrassed. A doctor rushed over to check on Mom, who was now sitting in a wheelchair, taking deep breaths from an oxygen mask they'd quickly provided. The doctor said they needed to get her into pre-op right away because her vitals were dropping. He looked worried and said the stress from the attack might have damaged her heart further. Everything became a blur after that. Mom was rushed away and I was left standing in that hallway, shaking. A police officer approached me about 20 minutes later. He told me they needed my statement about what happened. He explained that the woman who attacked us was being arrested for assault and battery. I gave my statement in a daze, barely able to focus on his questions. All I could think about was Mom in surgery, hoping and praying that the attack hadn't made things worse. The officer told me the woman had a history of outbursts and had been escorted from the hospital twice before that week. The surgery took 11 hours. I sat in that waiting room the entire time, replaying the incident over and over. Part of me felt sorry for the woman. I understood her desperation, her fear of losing her brother. I'd been living with that same fear for 2 years, but directing that rage at us, physically attacking my mother, who could barely stand on her own, that was unforgivable. Around hour 8, one of the woman's family members approached me in the waiting room. It was the older man who had tried to pull her away earlier. He apologized for what happened and said his sister had been under enormous stress. He explained that their brother had been declining rapidly and they were told he might not make it through the week. I told him I understood, but that didn't excuse what she did. He nodded and said he knew that. He said she'd been charged and would face the consequences. The surgeon finally came out and told me the transplant was successful. Mom was stable and would make a full recovery. He said it was touch and go for a while because the earlier attack had put extra strain on her failing heart. But the new heart was strong and working perfectly. I broke down right there in the waiting room. 2 days later, a nurse told me that the woman's brother had passed away while still waiting for a heart. The nurse also mentioned that the woman was facing criminal charges and was being held without bail after her outburst continued even at the police station. She'd apparently tried to attack the officers who arrested her. Mom recovered beautifully. 3 months later, she was walking without help. 6 months later, she was talking about maybe trying light jogging again. A year later, she completed a 5-kilometer walk for organ donor awareness. I walked beside her the entire way, watching her smile and laugh with other transplant recipients. I never saw the woman again, but I heard she'd been sentenced to 18 months for the assault. The judge had apparently been harsh because she'd shown no remorse during the trial. She'd continued to insist that we'd stolen her brother's heart and that his death was our fault. Her family had testified against her, saying they'd tried to get her help, but she'd refused. I understand grief and fear can make people do terrible things, but I'll never understand how she thought hurting us would save her brother. I used to work data processing at a regional office, and that's where I first met this woman. Let me call her Karen since I don't want to use her real name. Karen had been doing the same job for about 15 years when I started. She wasn't good at what she did, but she'd been there long enough that management just let her coast along. The thing about Karen was that she loved pointing out other people's mistakes. It didn't matter how small the error was or whether it actually affected anything important. If she spotted it, you were going to hear about it. And not just from her, your supervisor was going to hear about it too. My first week on the team, I accidentally left a field blank in a report. The field was for a middle initial, and the person whose file I was working on didn't have a middle name. I checked 3 times. No middle name anywhere in the system. So I left it blank and moved on. 20 minutes later, I got an email from Karen with a screenshot of my entry. The subject line said there was missing data in the report. She'd written 2 paragraphs explaining that all fields needed to be filled in and that I should have put something to indicate no data was available in the field. She'd copied our supervisor on the email. I replied back explaining that the person didn't have a middle name. Karen sent another email saying that I still should have indicated that in the field somehow. Again, with a supervisor copied. Our supervisor eventually sent me a message telling me not to worry about it and that my entry was fine. But that was how Karen operated. She'd find something, anything, and make sure everyone knew about it. The worst part was that Karen made plenty of mistakes herself. She just didn't like anyone pointing them out. One time, another coworker noticed that Karen had entered a birth date wrong in a file. It was off by 10 years. The coworker mentioned it to her quietly at her desk. Karen got defensive and said she'd fix it. But then she went to the supervisor and complained that the coworker was being too controlling and making her uncomfortable at work. Karen also had this habit of adding extra fields to spreadsheets that nobody asked for. She'd decide that a report should include information that wasn't relevant to what we were tracking, and then she'd email people asking why they hadn't filled in those fields. When they'd point out that those fields weren't part of the original template, she'd argue that they should be and copy the supervisor to back her up. Nobody liked working with her, but she never did anything bad enough to get in real trouble. She just made everyone's day a little bit worse. After about 2 years on that team, I got an opportunity to transfer to a different department. I took it immediately. I was just glad to be away from Karen and her constant emails. My new team handled a different type of data processing. We worked with financial records and client information. It was more detailed work than what I'd been doing before, and I liked it. The people were nice. The supervisor was reasonable. Everything was going well. Then one day, about 3 years after I'd transferred, I got an email from my supervisor. The subject line said something about temporary assistance from the regional office. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Karen's department was running low on work, so they were sending her over to help with data entry for our team whenever she finished her own tasks for the day. After 3 years of peace, I was going to have to deal with Karen again. She started the following week. I barely saw her at first because she worked in a different section of the office, but her entries started showing up in the system, and that's when I noticed something interesting. Karen made mistakes, a lot of mistakes. She'd transposed numbers and dollar amounts, she'd entered dates in the wrong format, She'd misspell names that were clearly printed in the source documents. She'd put information in the wrong fields. The kinds of mistakes that anyone might make, sure, but mistakes nonetheless. For the first couple of weeks, I just fixed them when I found them. That's what I did with everyone's mistakes. We're all human. We all slip up sometimes. But then I was reviewing a batch of entries one afternoon and found 3 errors in a row, all from Karen. One was a dollar amount that was off by $500. That's the kind of mistake that could cause real problems if it went unnoticed. I stared at my screen for a minute, then I remembered all those emails Karen used to send me, the screenshots, the detailed explanations of what I'd done wrong. The supervisor always copied on every single message. I opened my email and started typing. I attached a screenshot of the first error. I explained exactly what was wrong and how it should have been entered. I wrote that I would fix it, but wanted to bring it to her attention so she could avoid the same mistake in the future. Then I added her supervisor to the recipient list. I did the same thing for the other 2 errors. 3 separate emails, 3 screenshots, 3 detailed explanations, all with her supervisor copied. The next day I found 2 more mistakes in Karen's entries. I sent 2 more emails. The day after that I found 4 mistakes, 4 more emails. I kept it up for weeks. Every single error I found in Karen's work got the same treatment. Screenshot, explanation, notification to her supervisor. I was always polite, I always said I would fix it, I always framed it to help her improve. I used the exact same tone she'd used with me years ago. After about a month, I noticed that Karen was being much more careful with her entries. The number of mistakes dropped significantly. I still found one here and there, and I still sent my polite, helpful emails every time. One day I saw Karen in the break room. She looked at me and quickly looked away. She grabbed her coffee and left without saying anything. I was just following the standard she'd set herself. My dad and I had been living together since the divorce. Just the 2 of us in a small apartment across town from where Mom moved. It wasn't perfect, but we had our routine. He worked during the day and I went to school. Evenings were usually quiet, with him watching TV and me gaming upstairs when my console still worked. I'd finished my homework one night and came downstairs to grab some water from the kitchen. When I walked past the living room, I could hear the TV playing that movie again. You know the one I'm talking about. That feel-good drama about some white teacher going into a rough neighborhood school and saving all the troubled kids with poetry and determination. My dad watched it at least once a month, and every single time he'd get emotional during the same scenes. I looked over when I headed to the kitchen, and there he was, sitting in his recliner with tears streaming down his face. The main character was giving some inspiring speech to the students about believing in themselves. It was the same speech I'd heard a dozen times before. Something about the predictability of it all just struck me as funny in that moment. Here was this grown man crying over a movie he'd seen so many times, he could probably recite it word for word. A small laugh escaped me. I tried to cover it up, but it was too late. His head snapped toward me so fast it startled me. The tears were still wet on his cheeks, but his expression had changed completely. There was something dark in his eyes that I'd never seen before. He stood up from the recliner without saying a word. I felt my stomach drop. I'd messed up. I knew it immediately. He crossed the room in 3 long steps. I was wearing this chain necklace that my uncle had given me for my birthday a few months earlier. Before I could react, his hand shot out and grabbed it. He started wrapping it around his fist, twisting it tighter and tighter. The chain dug into the back of my neck when it shortened, pulling me forward. My face ended up just inches from his. He just stared at me. His jaw was clenched tight and his eyes were boring into mine like he was looking straight through me. The pressure on my neck kept increasing. I couldn't breathe properly. The edge of the chain was cutting into my skin. I panicked. My hands came up instinctively and I started hitting him in the chest and shoulders. Not hard at first, but when he didn't let go, I put more force behind it. I must have landed 4 or 5 solid punches. He didn't even flinch. It was like hitting a wall. He just kept staring at me with that same intense expression, not blinking, not reacting to the hits at all. Then suddenly his hand opened. The necklace loosened and I stumbled backward, gasping for air. He turned around without a word and walked back to his recliner. He sat down heavily, and within seconds his eyes were closing. Just like that, he passed out in the chair like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on my neck where the chain had dug in. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I heard him moving around downstairs like it was any other day. When I finally came down for breakfast, he was at the stove making scrambled eggs and humming some tune from the radio. He greeted me cheerfully and asked if I wanted some eggs. He said he'd made extra. He was smiling and acting completely normal, like we were living in some alternate reality where the previous night hadn't happened at all. I just stared at him and asked if he was being serious right now. He asked what I meant and offered to make me toast too. I told him about last night. I said he grabbed my necklace and choked me with it. His smile faltered for just a second. Then he shook his head and went back to the eggs. He said he didn't know what I was talking about and suggested I must have had a bad dream that made something snap inside me. He was really going to pretend nothing happened. He was going to gaslight me about something that had left marks on my neck. I told him it wasn't a dream. I described how he wrapped my chain around his fist and pulled me close. I reminded him that I punched him multiple times, and then he passed out in his chair. He went quiet. The spatula stopped moving. He kept his back to me, but I could see his shoulders tense up. I asked him if he knew what would really help me forget about this whole thing. He turned around slowly and I could see the guilt starting to creep across his face. I brought up how my Xbox had broken 2 weeks ago. I reminded him that I'd been pretty upset about it and had been thinking about it constantly. Then I suggested that if I had a new one, my mind would probably be occupied with other things. I told him I probably wouldn't dwell on last night so much if that happened. His face went pale. He understood exactly what I was saying. He said he could probably swing by the store after work that day. I mentioned that the new model had just come out and it was a bit more expensive. He quickly said that was fine and I could get whatever I needed. I'd never seen him so eager to open his wallet. Usually I had to ask 3 times for anything and provide a detailed justification for why I needed it. But that morning he practically tripped over himself agreeing. He went to the store during his lunch break instead of waiting until after work. By the time I got home from school, there was a brand new Xbox sitting on my bed, still in the box, with 2 extra controllers and 4 games. He never watched that movie again while I was in the room, and we never talked about that night again either. Things went back to normal after that. It really was just a one-time thing that never repeated itself. But I got a lot of gaming hours out of that new console, and every time I turned it on, I remembered exactly how I'd gotten it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.